That's a bad Photoshop.
In after
Right.
the last person.
Let's go on Reddit.
This is me.
Geezer, you're up, bro. Go.
Right, so I've got a point regarding North Korea. If no one else is willing to
Okay.
take the floor.
Nuke
I
'em.
mean, I was waiting on. Is
Nuke
he
'em
gonna
all to
speak
death.
or?
Yeah, it was you had the floor, geezer.
For fuck's sake.
Come on. Yeah.
Okay, Geezer, you have the floor.
I think he's wanking or something.
Okay.
I'm
gonna take the floor with the question: how do you think the professionalism of which Donald Trump handled the Korea situation is going to affect how Kim Jong Un wants the situation to go down? Because he's never had to deal with a president like Trump before, and who knows?
I don't think he really cares because he doesn't.
I can't even
don't
tell
think
if
he's
we
ever
have
gonna
any
attack
fucking
America.
Hold it,
viewers right
please.
now.
Dr. Uncle, your level is low, but you do have the floor.
Okay. So I don't think Kim Jong whatever is going to do anything because he doesn't want to get crushed. He's just trying to keep his power, and he knows nukes will prevent us from completely crushing them because we don't want to start some nuclear war. He knows how Iran or whatever countries got destroyed. So I don't think it matters whether it's Trump or whoever. You know.
No, and getting nuclear weapons isn't about deterrence for the North Koreans. They already have deterrence. They can totally.
Please.
No, they do. I mean, so for instance, they can detonate the explosives they've put in the dam. They can, fire all the artillery pieces along that mountain range pointed at Seoul. The point of the nuclear weapons is so that they can blackmail the international community for all kinds of different things. They can say, hey, we might decide to sell some of our nuclear material to Iran or Syria or some, terrorist organization or whoever.
Hey guys, I just want to announce a breakthrough on our record number of viewers. For the first time on the channel's history, we just hit a grand total of 0 viewers, and I think we should be really proud of it.
Round of applause.
I'd like to open the floor regarding Kushner's point to
Right back.
to Casey. You have a response
Is this about the my bad?
to the nuclear proliferation comments?
Well, so not necessarily about the nuclear proliferation thing, but I kind of think people are freaking out about North Korea almost unnecessarily because I feel like what we have been doing consistently, like sanctioning them and like trying to change like the regime from within, like basically blocking them and like with the international activities and also kind of like sending them flash drives with like proper like just media on it. Like I think North Korea now, it's getting harder and harder for North Korea to actually lie to its citizens. I think eventually the regime is most likely going to collapse, and when it does collapse, that'll be a lot safer than them like just leveling Seoul with a bunch of artillery. Like it's just like the only kind, like our hands are tied if we want to save lives.
Do we have any rebuttal on the floor?
Saving lives. That's politics solved, boys.
Mr. Reverend, did you have a point to state?
Not really.
Kushner, do you have any follow-ups to what Casey said?
I do.
Okay.
People have been commenting. This is a bit somewhat unrelated, but people have been commenting on the irrationality of Kim Jong Un, and I don't actually believe he is irrational. I think it's a carefully constructed facade, as somebody else mentioned in voice text, to basically retain prestige of the regime, because this man was educated in Switzerland, in the Western world, and I think his regime will behave according to how political science would predict, just only for a dictatorial regime, and we haven't seen those in a while. I think the best thing to do would be to look back to see how the Soviet Union responded to how Barry Goldwater in 1964 was basically saying we want absolute victory against the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union responded negatively, obviously, but it didn't come to anything in the end, I think. You could say that's because... No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go.
Obviously, Barry Goldwater wasn't elected, but I think that it didn't actually escalate the situation as much as people thought it would.
On that point, when we were discussing the influence of the media, I'd actually like to move the topic to a question posed: should the freedom of speech extend to online services which are monopolistic and have the majority of the market share? Is there a person who agrees with this?
Yes.
Please state your point.
Very awesome point. I'm so glad you said it. Okay, I'll make my point then, since I'm not retarded. The point is, I think everybody has a right to voice their opinion, and in the modern era, where the only way people can really voice their opinion anymore is online.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with that.
Hold the floor, please.
Go on.
I don't think any one place should have the right to ban somebody because of their opinions, and I think that also goes online. I don't think a store should have the right to ban somebody for being conservative or liberal, and I think that goes for social media as well.
We have counterpoint.
Yeah, online is not the only way to express oneself. So the argument that therefore, the freedom of speech should extend towards it, it's a
No, my
non-starter,
argument
really.
is
One
it
moment,
applies.
please recognize Selenia.
Yeah, that's it. He's free to respond to that.
My argument isn't that it's the only place to voice your opinion, therefore it's fucking should apply online too. My point is, it works like that in real life, it should work like that everywhere else.
In what way does it work like that in real life?
If you walk into a store wearing a MAGA hat, you don't get banned from the store.
You don't get banned online for expressing support for, I don't know,
Yes, you
certain
do.
candidates. No,
Yes,
you
you do.
don't. You get Okay, I'd like an example then.
People have gotten I forget the name of the guy.
Really quickly.
There was a guy who got banned from.
One moment, we have an interjection, please. Recognize the interjection.
Really quickly, I would like to point out to somewhat support Crow. Somebody was recently actually suspended from their account for pointing out to Jack that somebody was being racist and talking about kill all white people and stuff like that.
So that person was
Somebody-
inciting violence.
One moment, please.
No, I'm saying I'm not saying that the person saying kill all white people was banned. The person reporting the person white people was banned.
All right, and my point before I got fucking interrupted was that there was someone recently on Twitter, and by recently I mean like 4 fucking months ago. It's kind of old news by now, who refuted one of Anita Sarkeesian's arguments on Twitter and got banned because guess who's in the fucking court of great people on Twitter who gets to ban people? Anita
Feminist
Sarkeesian.
Frequency. Yeah, the
And
Twitter
why-
Trust and Safety Council.
Do we know why the person was banned? The specific reason?
I think it's pretty self-evident that he got
No,
banned
it's
20
not
minutes.
self-evident.
No.
They
They tend
don't-
to give an official reason. Well, we're wondering.
These official reasons tend to be cited as hate speech, even
Yeah.
though they're not.
Okay,
clearly
what did the person say? Do we know what tweet?
Yeah.
Feelings
were hurt.
I'll pull it
Let's
up
hear
real quick.
Midwest,
One sec.
please, and then after Midwest, we'll hear the next interjection.
Oh, I didn't say I wanted to interrupt, but okay. Freedom of speech is good, and if they have monopoly, then yeah, I mean
That was a great argument. I'm so
Hey,
glad.
I'm not done yet, buddy. Okay, so any monopoly,
level of disgust.
whether or not we should allow private companies to restrict freedom of speech, if it's a monopoly, there's 2 options. You either allow or force them to allow freedom of speech, or you break up the monopoly. So
Yeah, I'd like to add to VG's point.
All right.
It's a very messy situation because, as we all know, the internet is an international utility. It's a vector of communication between any 2 people at any point on the planet that can maintain a secure internet connection. So it would have to vary by province. But the thing is that the companies would have to play by the rules of the region that they're in So if someone here said something that falls under the parameters of free speech, that company should not censor them on the basis of something that violates what they feel infringes on their moral agenda, but doesn't violate their terms of service.
I have a point.
Because that's an important distinction. There is a terms of service that also is another filter.
Stage fright, did you have a point?
I would also like to add one more example to this, as one I see as far more egregious, and that's what one person who had gotten Crown Tea banned. Crown Tea was banned, and he showed evidence for it, but sadly, that account was also banned, and he was banned for arguing with a person who wanted child molestation and wanted well,
Jeez.
to be lowered the age.
So Lenya, please, do you have a rebuttal to that or a comment?
Yes, I'd just like to make a comment as to what, and I don't mean this to sound to be condescending, but there seems to be a lack of understanding of what exactly free speech is. What I'm hearing is a freedom to be heard. No disrespect, but no one has a freedom to be heard. You have freedom to speak. Now, what I'm hearing is I'm being banned from online. No one's banning you online. People are banning you from their website, from their platforms. Excuse me, but my right to my private property, be that my YouTube, if I'm the creator of YouTube or I'm CEO of YouTube or Twitter, whatever, trumps your right to express your opinion on that platform. So if I want to ban you, I can do that. Monopoly doesn't even. I'm not done.
That's why.
Lenya has the floor.
Point of order.
So Lenya has the floor still.
Thank you. And fuck's sake, so I hate being interrupted. So my right to my property trumps your freedom of speech. Second of all, and even if the concept of freedom of speech is this: you say something, you express an opinion, and you're not thrown in jail for it. You're not punished by the law for it.
Not in your country anymore.
Yes, because you know so much about my country. So when you're even if you're banned from the internet, which does actually happen in some cases, you're still free to find other platforms to express. You can go on the street and start yelling whatever you want to yell on the street. You can, I don't know, write letters. You can take out a column in the newspaper. So, let's not get carried away. Let's be a bit, try and understand what we're talking about here.
I have
freedom of speech is not freedom to be heard.
Okay, point of order. Geezer.
That's why
Geezer. Did you have a rebuttal regarding the country that he's from?
I have a point.
Okay.
So imagine, this is a point to Selenia. Imagine in the future, right? In the future, instead of talking with your mouth, maybe we'll all be talking with computers, with the internet. So if effectively the internet is your voice, what happens then? If everybody is only communicating through computers.
I have another point to make.
First to me, can I answer it?
Yes, Selenia has the floor. Then after that, we have
me.
Go.
Okay. No offense, but that was a reductio ad absurdum, if I've ever heard one. Why in the future would we lose our ability to speak with our mouths?
Okay.
Well,
sorry.
You're talking in, I guess, what I would call hypotheticals, right?
No,
and
you're
so
talking
am I.
hypotheticals, actually.
Right.
I'm
I
talking
think
hypotheticals.
reality. Please let him
hypothetical wasn't the best word. You're talking in absolutes, I guess, as far as whether or not people should be able to speak and whatnot. I'm just saying the practicality of everybody, being able to communicate, to speak.
Yeah, if I may quickly interject, VG was showing, he was outlining, if I understand correctly, he was outlining the progression of our current timeline because a few years ago, like I'll ballpark it around 2000, the internet wasn't as much of a great vector for communication as it is today. And we're steadily moving to a point where it's becoming more and more interconnected. And I feel he was showing that what I was outlining before is the way we're headed. It's going to be a vector for communication. It's not going to be our only vector for communication, but it's a way to reach farther. It's a way to reach faster. And if certain people are given leeway and maintain that advantage over other people who have, quote, unfavorable opinions, does that create an unfavorable edge for people who kiss up to some of these unjust rules?
Okay, the floor recognizes Mr. Crow.
Thank you. Okay.
After
My point is that I think whether or not it's private property is irrelevant when it comes to things like Twitter and Facebook, because you're creating a platform specifically designed to allow people to speak their opinions. And I think when you do that, you give up your right to censor people because of property. I think at that point, freedom of speech does apply.
You just joined the conversation. Wait.
Yep.
Okay, the Miravis is recognized.
Thanks. It's worth noting that the historical precedent, or rather the historical analog to this, would be public tribunes and places that posted like wanted ads and stuff. That used to be the BBS, or like the bulletin board of yesteryear. And it's absolutely worth noting that they were ostensibly places for public discourse, and yet never in the history of our country have we recognized that free speech applies to them. They can still publish whomever they want to, and not publish whomever they want to. So,
Point.
if I may.
Okay.
Yes, if I could recognize whoever said point, if I may.
Yes, that'd be me. Thank you, Chair.
Those are two different people. I said point. Someone else said if
All
I
right,
may.
I'd like to hear from Josh, please.
Thank you, Chair. Essentially, there's an issue here because with the argument that you forsake your right to basically take proprietary measures and you basically cut users out, because the fact is no one of these things has any large market share. There are many institutions and outlets for which people can speak over. So it seems unreasonable to ask.
Not true.
Let him finish the point.
Order, please, Mr. Josh is the floor.
Considering the fact that there are multiple outlets, it doesn't seem like there should be any sort of oversight of them to prevent censorship. It's like any news organization, for example, can publish, as somebody had previously mentioned, whatever they very well pleased, and the same applies for newspapers. They can publish whatever opinions they want, and why shouldn't the same apply to social media?
I have a point.
I have a point.
Hold on, one moment. Do we have anyone specifically responding to that? Selenia.
Yes,
will be
I do.
next in
I do. Yeah, I have
Crow,
something to say.
all right, so we're going to recognize Selenia, then Crow. Selenia, you have the floor.
Okay. Yes. So to Crow's earlier point about you forsaking your right, he said something about more property rights. Because when you set up your platform, you sort of give up that right. No, you don't. These companies set up their platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc., with one goal in mind: profit. Okay, that's their first goal, to make profit for their shareholders. So no, free speech doesn't trump that, especially when it's a private venture. Second of all, to the extent that this social media platforms, website have a monopolistic influence or position in society, that's due to us. We go to them. They don't force us to use their services. It's not like the corn laws of yesteryear where you can only buy, your maize, your grains from certain industries. No, we have. This is the free market at work. We choose to go to these platforms. You've got what's that idiot's platform? The one with the frog, Gab. Yeah, if you don't like Twitter, you
Evan
can go
McGinnis.
to that. Yeah,
One
you
moment.
can go to that. Okay, but don't try and impose your freedom of speech, or as you see it, on whoever runs Twitter now, Jack, whoever his name is. They have a right to their internal policies, and if you don't like it, vote with your feet or with your login
On
details
that
or whatever.
point,
I
on
have
that
a
point of
response
order,
to
on
that.
that
I
point
have
of
a
order,
response to
So
that.
is the
on
argument.
that point
so
of
is the,
order, Gigantic will have the floor after Crow.
Okay,
Crow, the floor is
I
yours.
have 2 points. One is a response to that, and one is the point I wanted to make before. The point I wanted to make before is that these companies do have a large sharehold, especially when it comes to the prime example for me is YouTube. If you want to be an independent video maker, that's your only real option. And if you get banned from that because you triggered somebody, you're fucked. And my response to what Selenia just said is, if an artist draws a swastika on a piece of paper, does the manufacturer of that paper have the right to stop selling you paper?
Mr. Gigantic, the floor is yours.
All right, so my response to John Selenia,
Schmuck.
and basically, I kind of feel like these platforms have a massive market share, and I guess this is something that Crow kind of already said, but I feel like we've already seen that these platforms can be influenced massively to change political opinions, whether it's spreading disinformation, like about Russia influencing the election results by spreading all this fake news or whatever, but also they can and have used their platforms to target specific people and ideologies to either censor them or completely remove their digital footprint from the internet. Do you feel like that's okay? And do you feel like maybe are you advocating more for antitrust laws being used to break up monopolies?
We'll have a
Or-
point of order for response.
It was addressed to me, so may I?
We'll be moving on. Who has a point of order to response? Casey, who
I-
are you addressing?
Actually,
I thought it was addressed to me, but
Okay, Selenia, and then whoever wanted to interject.
yeah, that was me.
Both of us.
Selenia, then you.
Okay, briefly, I would just say I'm not against antitrust laws, or as we call them in the UK, competition laws. I'm actually strongly in favor of them to break up. Of course, I think right now Amazon earns 80% of every dollar spent on the market. Yeah, I think that's not okay. I think either they get together and say, okay, we're not going to go into certain areas, and then other ventures can control the rest. But on the topic of free speech, I just don't think it's the government role to start dictating, what businesses, what opinions. It's like it extends off the internet as well. You can start telling companies who to hire, who they can dismiss for expressing certain opinions. No,
Point of order. Can I hear
it's
the
not
interjection,
absolute.
please?
It's not an absolute right. It's a qualified right, and it should be.
The interjection, please.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think.
Well, no, I was going to interject.
Okay, you
stay
say
right.
something.
I have a couple of things. First is a question, and I just wanted to be clear here. Are you saying that corporations are people?
Selenia, please respond.
Oh, corporations are not people. Corporations do not have beliefs.
Then
I
why
s-
are you
I said
treating
the
them
peop-
like people?
How am I treating them like people?
Saying that corporations have the right
One moment.
to censor people.
No. I'm fine with Crow saying it. I have one more point, but
Final point on this issue will be made by Mr. Stagefright before we move on to a new topic regarding the freedom we should sacrifice in order to protect everyone from terrorists on this line of discussing freedoms.
I had one more
All right,
interjection.
all right.
Okay, we have Stagefright,
right, I'll
and then
finish.
Nervous has the final point.
All right, I'll finish my thing. My thing was I was going to suggest, and this is my personal opinion on the matter, that government, well, like with any regulation on companies, government can regulate companies, and so I believe that the government should regulate the company's ability to take away of the right to speak.
Mirabis, you have the final point and the floor.
Thank you. Now, I quickly to respond to something that Crow said. He likened it to a corporation printing out a piece of paper and then getting angry when you wrote a swastika on it. I think the correct analogy is a corporation getting angry when you write a swastika in their book, which they have open for anybody to write in. I don't think that it's wrong for somebody to say stop writing something that I don't want in my book. Now the sort of final thought is, compare this to say when Gutenberg had the only printing press in the world. Would it have been right for the government, or I guess the Bavarian government then, to institute for him to allow anybody to use the printing press? Because he literally had a monopoly on all printed press. And I don't think that I certainly wouldn't argue that he should have been made to print whatever anybody wanted because he had a monopoly on it. Anyway, thank you.
So we're moving on based looking at examining freedoms. A very interesting point has been brought up, and it's regarding the trade-offs and what sacrifices we want to make and the value of those trade-offs. I would like to ask who would like to speak regarding this first, and what is your point?
I have an interesting point.
Okay, the floor.
I have a question before we go on to this.
Yes. Okay. Stage fright.
Is there any reason why people are leaving to general from here? Or, I'm
They're
sorry if
debating
that's
ice cream flavors.
yeah. I'm sorry if that's an irrelevant question.
That's all right.
I'm sorry. What was your question?
I was thinking the same thing myself.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay.
All right, Midwest, you can speak.
Okay. Yep. So this might seem a little off topic, but has anyone seen Star Trek: The Next Generation?
Yeah.
There's an episode. It's actually my favorite episode. It's called The Drumhead, and in the episode, I won't go through the whole thing, but he just there's a effort to take away to leaders aboard the starship. They're all aboard, and so they start denying everyone's freedoms basically. And there's an interesting quote from it. He says, with the first link the chain is forged, with the first speech censured, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably.
The floor is recognized to ancient Carthage.
I hate when people fetishize me.
I was really just gonna say that I saw that episode and I thought it was pretty good. But I don't think they start censoring people's ideas. What they do is
I can't hear him.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. I'm gonna get on a better platform. I'm gonna yield the floor to whoever wants it.
Yeah, I can't hear him either.
I can hear him.
Give me 1 second. Let me get on the
I'll restart my Discord.
Just technical interjection. If you're having trouble hearing someone, you can right-click on them and adjust their volume manually. If that still doesn't work, then yeah, but the stopgap measure at least. Anyway, sorry.
So we are again on the topic here regarding the freedoms that we should sacrifice, and let me clarify again. The point that is asked is how much freedom should we sacrifice in order to protect everyone from terrorists and others who would do us harm? If I could, I'd like to request a point regarding a particular note of anyone who would like to speak regarding electronic devices and whether the government should have a right or warrant for those. Does anyone have?
I have a point.
I have a point.
Okay.
I think that it's an inherent right for everyone, even if you're a convicted felon, that nobody should be allowed to snoop into your personal records without your permission. I think that applies to electronics. I also think it applies to diaries or anything like that. I don't think anybody should have the right to invade your privacy out of their belief that you could be planning to do harm, especially since it comes down to one person thinking that you could do harm, and usually people are wrong about shit. So,
are you a federal criminal?
Could I interject?
One moment, can we hear Mr. Wilson? Do you have an interjection, and followed by stage fright?
Grand Admiral Crow is a federal criminal.
Okay.
That is all.
Yeah, you're right. I'm actually a member of Al Qaeda.
Maybe add it to the list.
One moment. We have
If no one's gonna respond seriously, I'd like to.
Stage Fright, then Selenia, and then whoever asked after that. Stage
Yep.
Fright, you have the floor.
My interjection is simply a question. Would you extend that to warrants? Would you not allow a warrant to be written?
Response,
to-
please.
My response is no, I wouldn't.
Selenia.
So get rid of
Just
all.
a minor clarification. You would not. You don't think that it's right to search someone's phone, for example, even if there has been a warrant issued. Just to clarify.
Yes, I do. I don't think it's. I don't
So
think it's
so
right.
you
Okay,
wish
one moment.
for so you wish for the Constitution to have all traces of warrants struck out of it.
The only situation I think there should be, you should have the ability to invade someone's privacy in, is if there's actually significant evidence that they have already committed a crime.
That's
I don't think
That's what a warrant is for.
I'd like to
No,
ask
it's
a
a lot of the
question.
time. No, it's actually not.
If I
One
can,
moment, please.
A lot of the time, it's used to find out if someone is plotting a crime, and I don't think it should be.
Floor's recognizing
then-
Gigantic, followed by a rebuttal from Stage Fright.
oh, what happened to Selenia? Selenia was supposed to
Selenia
speak
actually-
at some point there.
Apologize about that. Sorry, Selenia.
Yeah, Selenia.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to absolutism going on here, but I do think the government has a responsibility to the safety of its citizens. Even the most staunch libertarians believe this. You know, the idea of the night watch government. So when there's a balance, there's always a balance to be struck between a person's privacy or his person's right to privacy and the safety of the general. And if the government feels the safety of the population, a person's privacy, then the path to be taken should be to go to court, and then the court will measure, would weigh one against the other. But this a view that the government shouldn't be allowed to snoop on people in any circumstance. It's not one I subscribe to. I mean, I see it's a law, but I like being safe. I like knowing the government's keeping me safe by spying.
If we could stay on that point
Alright.
before we
So
recognize.
could I
If I
speak?
may.
Okay, Gigantic, please. You have the floor.
Yeah, so to piggyback off John's point, Selenia's point, I kind of agree in the sense that there is a trade-off that we have to make, and I think most people most of the time will choose safety if they realize perhaps the scale of the deaths or whatever could occur. But I do want to know if anyone has any stats regarding how many kind of terrorist plots are foiled each year from the crazy amount of snooping that the intelligence agencies do in the US.
That's unfortunately
how much of it-
classified information.
Yeah.
When you're done.
Yeah, that information. If I may quickly interject,
Yeah.
that information
Yes.
is a lot more prevalent in the UK, per my knowledge.
We recognize Midwest, please.
Classified.
Yeah, my point is, you said you like to be safe, and I think we can all sympathize with that. Everyone likes to be safe. That's probably our most important need, right? Is to be safe. But yeah, there is a balance to be struck, but there's also a danger that comes with restricting rights.
I have a point I'd like to bring up.
For example, sorry, I'll just finish.
I don't think it's.
For example, you see outsiders as enemies, but enemies can come from within too.
Selenia, please give a response, followed by Carthage, and then whoever requested to make a point. Selenia, do you have a response to that?
Really, rebuts at any point I made, really. So I don't think there's any rebuttal to be made. I don't really hear.
It was a general comment.
Okay, on that point, Carthage, you have the floor.
I wasn't aware I had the floor. I don't really
Can I
have anything
request
to
the
say.
floor
'cause
next?
This is
Okay,
actually
well
kind
then
of a
me, I guess.
confusing
All right.
stuff.
One moment, Josh, and then Crow.
Oh come on! I was supposed to talk.
I do not believe after the many provisions of the U.S. Patriot Act expired, I do not believe the United States got substantially more dangerous. I think people can agree with me on this.
Yeah.
I think that, moreover, the U.S. Patriot Act has given the NSA an unprecedented amount of power to look into basically all of their electronic devices. However, I do believe that considering a warrant can be used either after the crime has been committed to search people's belongings. I believe also if there's conspiracy and there's reasonable evidence behind the conspiracy, a warrant will be issued. I believe the rate for false issuances of warrants is pretty minimal.
I disagree.
Mr. Crow, okay, Mr. Crow will reserve the floor. Is there a rebuttal to the specific point just made?
No.
Okay,
but
Mr. Crow, you have the floor.
Okay. My point is that I think it's completely fucking ridiculous to think that any one person or group of people has the right to issue a warrant to preemptively search somebody's house and all of their personal belongings. Here's a little hypothetical for you. Let's say you have that one weird kid in class. Everybody fucking knows him.
Eugene.
And I am him most of the time. So
has a trench coat, brings his
say,
DS to class.
Yeah, he's the weird faggoty kid with a fucking trench coat and a DS. He acts
Has
weird,
his
never
gigantic
talks to anybody.
anime pillow.
And it's everybody just kind of assumes let's not fuck with that kid. He's a school shooter. Let's say eventually somebody decides to fuck with that kid and kind of frame him, make it look like he's plotting a school shooting. That happens a significant portion of the time where people get framed for saying things they never said or doing things they never did. And then the government goes and searches their entire house and finds nothing, but ends up ruining their life and their psychological health in the process.
Stage Fright has the floor, followed by Miravis.
Yes. My point is that if he is framed for an action and the government doesn't investigate him, then he will likely be harmed more from that and be in fact protected from the fact that they found, hey, this person was framed, they didn't actually do it. That's mostly just a completely hypothetical situation, saying that their lives will be ruined from being proven innocent.
No, I'm saying their lives will be ruined because somebody's gonna break into their fucking house.
No, their lives were ruined by being framed, not by the police investigating and finding them innocent.
If I may, this is kind of I wanted to actually address this. First, warrants are only issued on the reasonable suspicion that somebody either has committed a crime or is planning to commit a crime. That is, you don't get a warrant issued on maybe this guy's going to commit a crime. You have to have the legal definition of reasonable suspicion in order for a warrant to be issued by a judge. And there's a lot of checks to make sure that people can't just the government doesn't just issue warrants for no fucking reason. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there is recourse in the example that you gave. There is recourse for the person who was wrongly accused. Now, I don't know if it's absolutely necessary, or I don't think it's absolutely necessary to eliminate the mere possibility that somebody could be wrongly accused, when it also necessarily means eliminating the potential to catch perpetrators and people who really are going to do wrongdoing. Because if we throw out this notion that no more warrants, then all of the warrants that were actually catching people, which at least to my knowledge is the vast majority of them, those go right out the window too. You have to look at the harm as well as the good. I get that nobody wants to have their privacy intruded, but at the same time, nobody wants to be shot and robbed.
Maravis, you're forgetting bounty hunters need jobs too.
I'd like to interject with a point.
Casey,
yeah, it's just to kind of I think this isn't really a response to what Miravis was saying, but it's kind of a question that I always think about. If you remove the war on drugs, how much less of an issue would this kind of internet stalking that the government does of everyone, how much less would it be? Is that a sizable kind of thing? Because I know that they passed that RICO Law Act in the US that it basically meant that the government can really snoop on organized crime and really put their foot down on people.
That's not what RICO does. That's not what
RICO's a little
does. RICO doesn't do that.
Selenia and then Mr. Midwest.
Recall is more actually. I have my problems with recall because I think it can lead to massive injustices. But it's not. It's not for the purposes of snooping. It's more basically to arrest. To be able to use criminal guilt by association. If we can boil it down to a simple sentence.
If you've ever seen the movie,
Gigantic can respond. Do you have a response?
I was just seeking clarification.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the movie Batman, you know where they get the accountant, right? This is the second Batman, Dark Knight, right? Batman goes to China and he gets the banker for all the all the mobsters, and he says, and Batman like starts pressuring him, and they say, and then he finally gives in and he says, I can give you all the information. It's all one big pot. So RICO is really just, if people commit crimes together, and I'm paraphrasing, but that means you can charge all of them. You can charge the organization.
Midwest, you should have started that sentence like, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this movie called Batman.
We have a
Never heard of it.
We have a counterpoint to that.
I think the subject is dry. That's my counterpoint.
All right.
No, I actually like this subject. I think it's I just find it. I mean, it's a very. You need to be nuanced on it, because the right to privacy, it does get violated a lot in the U.S. I think many of those statutes, it's just government overreach, and I mean, we've seen how the government, the U.S. government especially, can abuse, those powers in the name of security. I mean, they were spying on world leaders. I mean, your government, your NSA was spying on Angela Merkel at one point. I mean, that's just
every country does that. Every country does that. Every country does that. That's that. What America was doing is not out of the ordinary. Every country does it. In fact, the Russians and the Chinese do much, much worse than that.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's a ridiculous application of that law, of that power. It's an abuse of power, but I do think in some.
It's not an abuse of power at all.
It is an abuse of power.
No,
Why would you spy your allies?
Because it's in their interests to stay abreast of what people are thinking and feeling. Abreast, yeah. So it gets them in a really good position when they're negotiating.
Of course, it's in their interest, but doesn't make it right. Just because something is it's in my interest to probably go out there and probably rob the next guy I see.
Another thing is saying that it's
right, the right thing or a moral thing to do, and just because everyone's doing it, our government should be playing that game. Well, your government. I actually think that the UK does it, although they'd never admit to it, or it's not something they release publicly. But spying on your allies, then you're not really allies. You don't spy on your allies generally. You spy on your enemies.
No. I mean, in real life, they spy on each other all the time.
Yeah, but that shows that then saying they're allies is just a front for the
with friends like these.
They're not really.
No,
allies,
it's not a front. It just shows that there's always a certain level of mistrust, particularly on important issues that involve millions of lives. The other thing with the whole mass surveillance thing, it's here to stay. Plus, when we have globalism and we have the threat of the next Spanish flu, yeah, I kind of want mass surveillance because it could help stop these sorts of things from happening.
If I could get anyone who would like to respond to that, other than Selenia, in the interest of balance,
I would.
Joshua, you have the floor.
There's an issue with saying that other countries do much worse. Obviously, yes, you say that spying on allies, which, as somebody who participated in Model United Nations for 4 years, yes, it does happen incessantly. The issue is when you're spying on private citizens within your own country. And before the U.S. Patriot Act was passed, there was basically a completely transparent and legal channel for which this surveillance could occur. Yeah, it was the warrant and other legal channels that are similar to warrants. The issue, so now that doesn't exist. Like once the Patriot Act was passed, and even when those provisions expired, the surveillance is still there, despite that the fact that it shouldn't legally occur. The NSA isn't actually legally allowed now to do domestic surveillance, but everyone knows they do anyway. So the issue is it's becoming so far beyond transparent and so far beyond like the average voter's knowledge of the breadth and depth of it that it's out of control. In a democracy, that's fundamentally at odds with how a democracy should operate.
I think
wrong.
If
The
we
best
get a
way to run a democracy is through police state. Trust
we can
me,
get a
I know
response-
democracies.
Okay, let's-
Nothing
Mr.
makes a
Kushner has a
democracy
response.
better than constant surveillance.
Why are you heckling from the sidelines?
If Mr. Kushner has a response, it will be heard. After that, Mr. Mirabis will have the floor.
I'll pass it on to Miravis.
Mr. Mirabis, you have the floor.
I think we may be discussing two different things, or at least I think it's worth noting that there could be a distinction here. One is the sort of pragmatic reality that everybody is doing this. Two, everybody has done this for what seems to be a long time, at least modern history. And three, the people who we're talking about, specifically like the Western powers, tend not to do it anywhere near as much as certain other geopolitical states. On the other hand, there's also the issue of should a government maintain transparency? Like, I think pragmatically, if everybody else is going to do it, we sort of have to keep doing it. Similar to how in World War I, if the Germans start using gas on the trenches, everybody else is as well, even though the law says
I'm
not to.
Pickle Rick. I'm Pickle Rick.
Okay, Mr. Crow, please do not interject. Mr.
God
Mirabis
damn
has the
it.
floor.
It's okay. I'll mute him when they do that. So it's two different things. One is like I definitely don't want us to give up a weapon that other people have shown far more willingness to use and that could help us. At the same time, I think it's an important discussion to have that we need transparency in our government. So I think it may just be important to try and separate the two issues into and discuss them each on their own terms.
Can I get a response request for that?
Don't we admit though that because of globalism presents new risks, not just from terrorism but from pathogens? Like if you could imagine the Spanish flu happening to us right now, I think that maybe mass surveillance could be a way of dealing with the threats that globalism brings.
That's why I said I think the pragmatic
I have a
issue
point.
is separate. Yeah, I'll let you in.
Mirabis, please state your point. After that, Mr. Crow will be
Yeah,
recognized.
that's why I think you Kushner, you're addressing the pragmatic reality, which is geopolitically it would be kind of disastrous to give that stuff.
Order,
Like, dude,
please,
calm
Mr.
the fuck
Crow.
down.
Was that real?
damn it.
Like, was that real?
No,
I have
No,
to-
I think he was joking.
Anyway, I mean that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Is just that Kushner seemed to be addressing the pragmatic aspect of the issue more than the perhaps ideological one that I think John was.
I would like to actually present this question to everyone in terms of the debate, or the topic that Kushner brought up regarding disease and issues that we have to deal with. that.
Gigantic. You can't fucking mute me in text chat because I said.
Okay,
something
bro,
like
do
in
you
voice
want to
chat.
talk now or not?
Yeah. I have 2 points. Number one is you can't mute me in text chat because I said something.
Okay, that's
you don't
not a
like
fucking
in voice
point.
chat.
That's not a
And
point.
my other point is somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me.
Okay, I would like to request that Mr. Crow be removed from this floor.
Oh no.
Yes, Mr. Kushner, do you have any statements to further expand regarding disease control and surveillance, or does anyone have a counterpoint to that? Joshua?
Yeah. This is a bit unrelated. It's just a question to Kushner. Do you think it would be prudent then to make a balance between the two and have some sort of civilian oversight of people who can have reasonable security clearances in the United States, have civilian oversight of surveillance?
I think you
Would
have
that
that. They're
be-
called Pfizer courts, aren't they?
No. Pfizer courts just aren't up to scratch. They really aren't.
He's right in that he's right in that we have FISA courts are designed to do this, but Kushner is also right in that by and large nowadays they just kind of rubber stamp requests. especially from the NSA. That's how it's been doing what it's been doing, by the way. It just gets a FISA court to rubber stamp warrants for whatever the fuck it wants to do.
The issue that I think America has is they're not being pragmatic. They're kind of doing both things. That they're pretending that that they're not engaged in the sort of programs that they're engaged in, mass surveillance of various sort. But they're doing it anyway, and they're trying to avoid the conversation.
Do you have a response to that?
Other than to say, I think that that's a very fair analysis of the state of the matter.
I mean, FISA literally has rejected 10 out of
I'd like to
thousands.
propose a new topic.
Exactly.
I'd like to open the floor to a topic request. If you have an idea, if you'd like to nominate a topic, please nominate a topic. And then if you have a specific person you'd like to address it to, please address it to them and then begin the conversation.
I think for anyone, I'm really curious about what people's views are on Trump and Russia. Is Trump a Russian stooge? Is he a helpful idiot? Does he know? Is he actually a traitor and he's loyal to Russia?
I have a whole lot to say.
Well, that whole general discussion, I'm just curious what people's thoughts are on that.
Yeah.
One moment. If we have Mirabista, Selenia, did you request to interject after that?
No.
Okay.
I want to hear what Miravis has to say.
All right, Miravis, you have the floor.
I think there's a couple of different questions in there, because one is is it likely that Russia interfered with our elections and had a substantial effect? I think the answer is yes, largely because all the experts say yes, and unfortunately we can't know until they release classified information in 60 years. That being said, I can't remember another time in my life when the intelligence communities of the United States, Canada, Mexico, Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, basically all the Western countries, NATO countries, have agreed specifically to this extent on one thing. The other thing is that is Trump a Russian stooge? I don't know. I don't think so. I think the P tape is probably fake, to be quite honest. I don't even care if it's real, to be perfectly honest, because I don't think that that should even factor into the discussion when there's the issue that Trump has, whatever, $3 or $4 billion in debt that he owes to the Bank of Russia, which is controlled directly by Putin. So, what would you do if you owed anybody $3 to $4 billion? Now, what would you do if you owed Vladimir Putin $3 to $4 billion?
You're not
That's
defending
a lot
him,
of
are you?
leverage.
Are you defending him, Mervis?
Well,
Putin
I'd like
or
to
Trump?
respond.
I'm not really
Trump.
defending him. It's just it's pretty easy to see where the power dynamic lies between the two of them.
A point.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm done.
All right. So, also, people in Trump's administration, Paul Manafort most notably, have received very large sums of money in consulting fees to Russian businesses, which are basically fronts for laundering
And Kelly,
money.
right?
Yes. But Paul Manafort's house was literally raided in the middle of the night by the FBI, and it's known that he has the catchphrase that was used basically was the $60 million relationship between Paul Manafort and the Russian Federation and businesses within it, which are invariably connected to Russian oligarchs and Putin himself. So he obviously is somewhat indebted to Russian interests, and considering he held a position of considerable influence, I would say it's almost guaranteed that there is Russian influence within the United States government.
I think I should have been a little bit more clear in response to the original question. I don't know how much it's even necessary that Trump is even a stooge to Russia, given the amount of leverage that they hold over him.
Well,
Or rather, given the amount of leverage that it's reasonable to think that they hold over him.
To respond to Miravis, I think there's kind of two things here. There's the one, whether what you were saying, the whole leverage or his ties to Russia, but I think we're kind of well, I think when people talk about it, they think, did Russia hack the election? Or how much money did they pull? Like, how many people online did they have, like, spamming the hell out of Twitter and Facebook and all these fake news kind of companies?
Estimates between $5 and $15 million in online sort of fake news trolling operations. Or at least that's
Yeah,
what I've
so-
seen. I think they range the gamut from as low as like 1.5 to as high as 30 or 40 million.
And so it's kind of like a kind of troll savvy super PAC almost, like completely blanketing like online media spaces with anti-Hillary, pro-Trump messages.
On that point, I'd like to move to the topic of is the current media and certain. We're going to examine two things here. One is going to be the subject of the point: is our current media doing harm in our political discourse? What can we do about that? And also, regarding Mirvis's point that was made in terms of certain things being possibly fabricated, and the notion of alternative facts. If one has a strong opinion, are they being used by opposing political parties and ideology? I'd like to first open it up. If anyone has a final comment on the Trump-Russia issue. Otherwise, if someone would like to speak regarding the
something.
Just a
Okay.
question. What does? Because I don't think he actually established this. What his personal opinion was. The original requester, whose name?
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know who
I'm
asked the question.
happy to. Well, I didn't hear your opinion either. You can get yours after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I basically
Or you want to go
subscribe
first? Go ahead.
Yeah, I basically subscribe to everything Mirvis outlined in his how do I say?
So you think
So,
that Trump is either a Russian stooge or a helpful idiot?
I think I lean towards the more helpful idiot line of argument. To be honest, I don't think he's some sort of Manchurian candidate.
Yeah.
Calls from Vladimir every night saying, "Oh yeah, so you remember this is what you're going to do next week," or whatever Russian accent sounds like. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's anything like that. But I do think some members of his administration. Now, I don't think it's anyone sitting at the top tables. I don't think anyone who was going to be sitting at the top table, at the important tables, is now out of government. I think that was mostly going to be Flynn and Manafort, and they're no longer there. But I think lower operatives whose names don't really make, whom we've never heard of, I think, yeah, they will be the ones, whispering in his ears and in ways of moves to adopt certain policies, executive policies that will favor Russia without Trump necessarily knowing they would, or will favor certain Russian interests, Putin's interest. And let's not assume, Putin's interests are the same as Russia's. I think that's something people tend to that is trying to, further Russia's interest. Not necessarily. He has his own personal interest, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Is it's not going to be so obvious that everyone's going to say, "Oh, Trump is doing this. It's going to benefit Russia." No, it's more underlying than that, and I think.
Okay.
Point.
It's more about his
Unless-
hold on to power.
Unless anyone-
I can tie this in with the next topic too.
Unless
so.
anyone interjects, I'd actually like to stay on this topic if Josh had something to say.
I'm curious as to what you mean by Putin's interest or not Russia's interest. Define Russia, the people of Russia, the government of Russia.
The people of Russia, the government, the economy of Russia. I mean, I don't know if you're aware that the economy is not doing so well in Russia.
I've got a point I'd like to make.
The economy is never doing well in Russia, though.
Well, yeah, but Putin's
Right, obviously his machinations have led to sanctions on his fuel, as well as the issue with Saudi Arabia pumping a lot of oil into the market. But I would contend that Putin dictates Russia's interests as unilaterally, if that makes any sense. Like, he's a propaganda machine.
Mr. Gigantic, you have a point of order?
Yeah, so I think that like the point that John is making, or Selenia is making, or if I may interject, is making, is that Putin and Trump, and to a certain extent Erdogan in Turkey, they all kind of give each other legitimacy by acting like authoritarian strongmen, and basically getting Trump in power and getting the US to back off on Russia, trying to like all the rhetoric about being friends with Russia, perhaps cooperating in Syria and ending sanctions is really good for him. And there's nothing better, like if you want a mandate or you want support, is to have your country be under the impression that they're kind of sieged by all sides or having an aggressor. Like it's very interesting that Bush won in 2004 despite like having two pretty like unpopular wars and having a lot of opposition.
Yeah,
like I think being sort of perceived as being oppressed or in opposition is really good for leaders.
Yeah, I think I wanted to say my opinion. So,
The
and I
floor
can
is
tie
yours,
this
baby.
in,
It's all yours.
and I can tie this in with the next topic that
We
Birdie
just,
said.
I
which
think right now actually we seem to be we'll stay on this topic. It seems to be of interest.
Sure,
I don't
sure.
know.
It all ties
I really want to
together.
talk about
So
the next
I'm
topic,
just,
though.
it all
Okay.
ties together.
Final
But
point,
yeah,
Mr.
as far
Midwest.
as the alt-right goes and fake news, Putin, it's a dictator. So either one, they saw a weakness in our democracy, and it wasn't in the Democrats. It was in the Republicans. They could have directed all their resources and efforts to the Democratic Party if they thought that would have been successful. But I think most of us can agree that nobody would ever think that Russia could really infiltrate the Democrats because they have a attachment to reality. So Russians saw a weakness, and they saw it in the Republican Party. And I think that weakness has been there for a long time, maybe 30 years, or maybe longer. And so the fake news, that all goes in. Most of that is on the right. So
moving along with that topic, we go into the subject of fake news and alternative facts, as well as the role that the media plays in the election cycle. This cycle, we obviously saw, as many of the conversations here mentioned, the major influence of news, but also the perception and how it's stated. Would anyone like to express a particular point regarding any of these specific topics or any other topic?
Yeah, I'd like to start. I think that it's kind of interesting that this whole thing has kind of spiraled out of control. It seems to like the partisanship seems to have only increased when the digital age kind of officially took the reins from print media. Like it seems that like it's kind of tied to advertising, and the more sensationalist and partisan you are, the more successful you'll be. And being able to cater to like as many niche kind of opinions as well has seemed to really radicalize people in either direction.
Is there a response to that? Regarding the alternative facts, does anyone have a specific point regarding alternative facts? In fact, is it a major issue? And if so, how did the parties deal with it?
It's the most dangerous thing out there, this notion of alternative facts, and it sort of ties into the previous point about online media and the 24 hours news cycle. Now people can just it's almost ironic. It's similar to what the right criticizes about the left. The postmodernism in college campuses, and now leftists are creating their own truths. When you have things like alternative facts, people believe what they want to believe now, no matter how much empirical evidence you actually present them with. They just because there will be an outlet out there telling them that's all just lies, that's just all concocted information, that's misinformation, this is the real information, this is the truth. I mean, some of the stuff that went around during the last election cycle, not just in the US, but over here in the UK as well, I was surprised to actually see it. I don't know how many of you have seen the image of Barack Obama, garbed up as a Muslim, and that made the rounds during the election. And you have people actually buying into that and believing that. You have mainstream news outlets like Fox News and RT supposedly running with stories like the Seth Rich story. And when Kellyanne Conway first made the statement alternative facts, it was amusing at first. It was absurd to see the Trump administration resorting to such blatant lies, such Big Brother tactics. But when you actually think about it, digest it, and you realize that there are people, there's an audience for, there's a market for that. It's quite it really worries me, because it's like, what's the point of anything? What's the point of truth? What's the point of telling people climate change is happening when they're gonna believe when 99% of scientists say climate change is happening, and people will believe the 1% that says it isn't, just because they like the fact that 1% person, or they'd rather believe him. So it's very concerning stuff, and I can't really see a solution to it. I honestly can't. I think it's just going to get worse as the internet gets bigger, as we get more connected to each other.
Or rather, respond.
Yes, please.
Or sorry, what did you have something to say, Gigantic?
No, I said yes, please.
Brody's taking a break from adjudicating now that we're like at a much more manageable amount of people.
Yeah.
It's not really necessary.
Right.
I think the real question is, what caused it? What caused this separation from fact? Now you're from the UK, but in the United States, I have some ideas about what caused it. I'm curious what you think the causes of this separation.
I think one of the biggest. Sorry, if I can just quickly answer that, because I think I could point to one of the causes of it, although I'm no authority. I think our media here, partly my current employers, the BBC, are to blame for that. There's this balance fallacy, where you have an issue to debate, like let's go with climate change, for example, and you bring two people on. You have one person saying it's not happening, and you have one person saying it is happening. So when people watching that, and it's the 95% people get their news from that, and they think there's actually a balance, there's a debate to be had over an issue, contributes to it. When people think both sides have a valid argument, that contributes to this idea of alternative facts. Then, because you have someone who hasn't made up their minds, who's more sympathetic to either one person's facts or one person's style of arguing. Maybe they like the cut of his jib, so they're more likely to buy into whatever he's peddling, aren't they? Whatever she's peddling. So I think that contributed to it. Things like Question Time is a popular program in the UK.
I think the main cause of it is that people don't understand the difference between objectivity and neutrality. For example, the Swiss during World War II, they were neutral, but it probably would have been better if they fought the Nazis,
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Actually, that's something I actually tend to say to people, that there's a difference between neutrality and objectivity. But a lot of our media here, and even some of yours, like CNN, where they have 16 people on the screen arguing about a single issue. I mean, it should be ridiculous, but yeah.
Like the real time with Bill Maher on steroids.
there is. I wanted to kind of address this in one way. I think Russia kind of ties into this, in that they sort of latched on to the fact that you can, like we're saying, you can kind of just say things. Oh, sorry about that. I was trying to grab a mosquito. Fucking son of a whore.
Yeah, point, if I may.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no. I think that they sort of latched onto that and fed the fire. Like, it may not have been a huge fire before, but like if you're just gonna start shoveling leaves onto it, it's gonna erupt. And I feel like that's, or at least it was part of Russia's strategy with respect to the election. And the second thing is, we have in the United States a party which is. It's odd because there's not many other parties that gain major traction around the world, or at least in other democracies, that have such a sort of split from the truth. Like, I get that Democrats are wrong on some things, and and the Labor and the Tories are both wrong on some things, but it's not the same way that the Republicans eschew facts in service of whatever legislative agenda they have at the time. I think that may be a unique portion of it, at least in America.
So I wanna actually jump in here.
I'm done. Yeah.
So the issue, I think we all recognize that there's a significant kind of basically dysfunctional media that we have, and I think in every democracy, I mean, the whole an essential element, if not one of the key elements, is obviously the freedom of the press, but that we see in some cases kind of failed us here. But I don't know exactly how we can remedy that because we can't really regulate the press, but we look at something that in some ways I'm wondering if the toxicity of the total disconnect, like Mirvis was saying, especially if you listen to, I was listening to what's his name, Alex Jones, and then a conservative hosts. It's almost as if it is, in a way, could be construed as a malicious sort of thing. Is it also important to note is MSNBC now the highest rated station or a channel other than Fox News?
Something like that, yeah.
Like what can we possibly do? How can we like encourage? Is it about maybe teaching kids to be educated consumers of media? I think David was speaking about that maybe at his lecture. I'm not sure.
I feel like there are a few underlying causes for this. One of the most basic ones is education. Whether it be education by public outlets or by politicians speaking or in the classroom. Especially in the Deep South, you have I think a big change in how teaching has been done. For example, when my dad was younger, for example, he grew up in New Mexico and he learned evolution. Now, in many parts of New Mexico, including Santa Fe High School, evolution there's a large portion of time in which evolution was not taught. So education is one. Another one I feel is, again, the Republican Party. We come a long way from Woodward and Bernstein. Like the method in which news is delivered has changed. It's changed from this older form of basically conveying news, which I don't even remember because I'm only 18, to this basically constant feeding of news to the public, and we switch from topic to topic so quickly that every individual topic simply can't get the attention it deserves, and therefore it's open to individual interpretation, and I think that's a huge problem.
Would like to bring up that the news outlets also extend to the point where people have been shown to have actually lied and faked being violently assaulted in order to get on the news and show a specific narrative, both on left and right. Any thoughts on this from anyone?
Yeah, are you talking about the what was it, Amber Fields or Amanda Fields, with at Breitbart? Or she was maybe working for Vice or Huffington Post, and Ben Shapiro from Breitbart was the one who was saying that it happened, and people were denying that it happened.
There are multiple examples. I think that's one of them. And another one is when Tommy Lauren slashed her tires and was no, some liberal slashed my tires.
Oh, those tires look like they need to be replaced 2 years ago as well, right?
I mean, I think you're always going to have people that are pieces of shit, but also.
And you have Joey Salads, who created
that guy. Oh, fuck me. Yeah, I remember the Joey Salads incident. Ugh. Yeah, go on.
H3.
He's openly admitted that most of what he does is fake, though.
Yeah, but after being
H3,
caught in a lie.
H3 had to drag that out.
Can anyone who's old enough describe to me essentially how media, basically just television news, has changed since when they were children to now?
A little bit. I actually have kind of a crazy theory, as all or conspiracy, a crazy conspiracy theory, is all conspiracy theories
Wait,
kind
are
of
you
are.
not conspiracy nut?
Really, it's not really something I'm 100% committed
Yeah.
to. It's just the thought I had was that, you know, for all the years that our adversary was the Soviet Union, we're very relatively compared to now very united, right? An enemy. And then the Cold War ended, and right around that time, like the 90s, that's kind of when the Republicans seem to have kind of just gone nuts. I think they went nuts with under Nixon, but they also went nuts right around that time. And that's when Newt Gingrich was in Congress, and we all know what a big piece of garbage he is. But I mean, it's kind of like now that we don't have an external enemy, it almost seems like we've turned inward, where people are fighting each other here. And I think Fox News is like a perfect example of that. Like, just they see everyone who is not part of them or their viewership as the enemy,
Well, you also have to understand during that time when the Soviet Union was the enemy of the other superpower, it was just more than fighting the Soviet Union. It was also fighting communism. So, and within that, they threw in socialism. So, when the Cold War ended, and sorry, at that time, that's when you had both parties were essentially classical liberal parties. I mean, for a short while under FDR, you could argue there was democratic. The Democrats were social democratic and a bit progressive, not as progressive as we'd say now. But so essentially, when the Cold War ended, the culture war essentially began. During the Cold War, there wasn't really a culture war, or at least the right was dominating the culture war at the time because it was seen to be anti-American and communist to go against the prevailing culture. That's why they used to say the left was the counterculture. So at the end of the Cold War, the counterculture kind of rose, and then that's when the left really sort of gained a bit of a momentum. You had, socialist policies rising, and things just change. I think that's why. So this inward America looking in on itself, it's partly responsible of not, as you said, not having, an adversary, but at the same time, a lot of not having an adversary has allowed new ideas to flourish. And the dominant ideology is trying to push against that. The dominant forces, the powers that be, so to speak, are trying to, push against that because it doesn't really chime with their interests.
I think as well, like, oh, you go.
I wanted to ask because something that's interesting is I teach at it's called an international baccalaureate schools, and most of the students are very college, all that stuff, very intelligent, and yet I discovered they don't have a social studies or civics class, and I have students that are like in calculus, and they don't even know we have a mayor or much about a lot of our processes. And I was curious as to if what you guys had for social like education, and I'm wondering if that's like still in the curriculum or if it's been taken out and replaced with something else. Like, what did you guys learn? Did everyone learn about like the branches of government and stuff?
Yeah, I did.
So
I
I
had a civics class.
I just graduated high school and now I'm in college, and I took it started in middle school, really. This I feel like we still do. It's often in middle school, and if you don't go to the right high school, often it's neglected entirely. I can't speak for anywhere but the northeastern United States, but the northeastern United States definitely does emphasize civics, and I think that does have a huge effect on the population. For example, I met somebody here at my university who was, a mechanical engineer, so some guy who's good at mathematics, and who didn't know who FDR was. Seriously, he didn't know. He couldn't tell me what the New Deal was, yet he was a Republican. And I explained him the ideas of the New Deal, and he liked them, and which is a strange notion. And I feel like that does have a huge impact on basically the quality of the citizenry, which is why the shift
Well,
towards
Josh,
STEM is a bit concerning.
I think it's interesting that a lot of like pro-Trumpian people really supported Trump's policies when it came to like building up infrastructure and like kind of growing certain parts of the government. Like typically we think of Republicans or conservatives as being like wanting to shrink the size and scope of the government, but Trump really wanted to increase it in some key areas.
It's
Oh,
also
you're absolutely
it's also
right there.
not just education though, because you can say, well, we can get education to try to get civics in the classes and all the rest of it, but you know, we don't live in an isolated age. They have the internet. The fact that they themselves are not interested enough to educate themselves shows that there's a problem. Even if you had,
Right.
do you have to force people to learn
Yeah.
things they don't really want to learn?
I mean, honestly, I think you do, man.
See,
Think
yeah.
about outside of this group, how many people actually care about politics and
Not
technology
many.
investments?
Another issue is that people don't know what they don't know. For example,
Right.
like if there's a part of history that they're unaware of, they can't simply look it up because they're unaware of it. It's like it's this paradox here. So that's the point of education.
I mean, I've
really
seen,
isn't.
It's
Go ahead.
yeah, like this is mostly in response to like Brody's. He was asking earlier about like what did you learn? I mean, I did go to a magnet school, so I don't think it's absolutely representative of all the South, but we did have our history textbooks as they were revisionist textbooks. And it was funny because they were basically the same in every way as any other textbook, except for the fact that when the question at the end of the chapter, the review question said, "Why did the Civil War start?" The answer was not slavery. The answer was states' rights.
Oh no!
one of the things that also interests me is, like, in working in this mayoral campaign that I was kind of like one of the I don't know, I had a leadership role to some extent. Like, people, the things that people vote on are fucking insane. One person told me that they made their decision based on whoever had the most signs. Like, I I just don't know if people
People
are
actually decide that way.
yeah, he said that. Like, he was like, "What?" And I was like, because I was like, "Hey, what made you vote for Rick?" And he goes, "Well, he's like, there's a lot of signs, and like, just no, like no real kind of knowledge about it." But I also don't know if people naturally have that prerogative. I think maybe does some of it come down to parenting? I mean, I don't know if we can rely on schools for everything, but it's just weird that even among people I know some very intelligent people that just have no interest in political, things. And I guess, what are ways do you guys try and get your friends to, like, do you
Yeah.
actively go out and do stuff like to try and get them involved?
Yeah, I mean, I actually do, but it always catches me off guard how uninterested in people. I mean, I actually think being more interested in politics because it's very interesting, but I guess it's more of a subjective thing. But you'd be surprised how much people don't know about politics, what's happening about political ideas, but then again, Everson, you also have to consider time as well. People just don't have the time. People are working 8-hour jobs. And especially if they've got kids, and even if they haven't got kids, where do they find the time to like pay attention to what's happening around them, to even vote in some cases? So it's very difficult. It's just
Yeah.
I can't really think of any solutions to it apart from the education one.
I
But
kind of
then
feel like
yeah, go on.
we're like rich kids in the United States, at least, and other places, of course. But I kind of feel like we're kind of like rich kids here. We've inherited this awesome system of democracy, and we have control over our government, or at least theoretically, the system is set up to do that, But there's this scene from Horace and Pete. It's a Louis.
Yeah, bro,
Louis
you love
C.K.
movies, huh? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I do. It's a Louis C.K. Series, and there's a character who talks about how the system is all set up. People can have whatever government they want It's just nobody cares, you know. And I think a civics classes, they might help, but the facts that we're talking about that people don't understand, you don't really need a whole class to know them. They're really basic things that people don't understand. Like a lot of people don't understand that the president is not like a dictator. Like a lot of Trump voters think that the president is like a dictator, basically. And you know, they just don't understand
He's
that
the bully
we have
pulpit.
right, that they don't understand that we have like a Congress, and the Congress and the judicial branch and the president, they all, you know, they all share power. So
I'm curious also to like to Casey and the foreigners here, the non-Americans. Like on the outside looking in, it seems like Kushner too. Also, he bail? Is he still here? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, he went to bed.
There, it's interesting to me among the Pakman audience, but also just among a lot of people I talk to in general. There's so much international interest in United States politics. There's people that aren't from here that are more interested in our political.
Well, this actually ties into a point that I was going to make. Is this like
we
we talk
what
about?
is your perception here of us here?
Well, so we talk a lot about like, you know, it'd be a lot better if people were educated, if people were kind of more aware. But I think at the same time, there's kind of a danger to turning politics into entertainment. And I mean, I really enjoy it. We all fucking do. Obviously, that's why we're here. But at the same time, like people just kind of get excited about it. But this is like how we run our country and government and how we live our lives. But a lot of people are just kind of like just enjoying the rhetoric. Like that's kind of what they're doing and enjoying the sensationalism of it. And like you say with like our current like in the US, like the primaries and the general election, it has a lot of WWE in it.
Wasn't there a philosopher who said that gosh, I can't remember, it was a woman who said that all politics is actually theater, kind of going back to the original Greek or whatever system where they would kind of present their ideas to each other. It was a really interesting analysis of how really it's just a projection of certain things, and I think Hillary was like the ultimate fucking epitome of that, where it's there's not as much substance there. But I'm curious about how people do perceive it as entertainment, and if that's has it always been that way? I mean, if you
I don't
look at
think
it,
it has. I think
when did it change?
recently,
yeah.
very recently. If like, and I would absolutely love to hear if somebody disagrees with
I
me. but
actually do disagree a little bit.
Awesome. Well, I'll finish and then you go. I thought it was like they're increasingly so since we started doing televised presidential debates. But you know, like they started with Nixon not wanting even to put on makeup because, well, in his case, men don't put on makeup, but you know, you don't need to be done up to make a good case in a debate. So I think he was technically right, and ever since that, like Reagan was a big step along the way because he was a fucking actor. And certainly in the modern era, the last 4 presidential elections, the debates have been more spectacles than debates. It's kind of competitive preaching.
Yeah, I guess my point would be that really I think the entertainment factor kind of followed the ridiculousness of politics. I think we started making politics entertainment when it really started to become ridiculous. I think the other, you know.
So one thing I'd kind of like to talk about maybe is like if you compare like say the activists and the kind of the media activists today with like say the hippies or the civil rights campaigners of the past, like how like where are the differences in terms of like how they're kind of like portrayed in the media?
Hippies?
Well, the hippies were like kind of like a culture war movement kind of, and they were also like really strongly against the Vietnam War.
Oh, okay, I guess. That's true.
I mean, I went to, excuse me, our protest here after the travel ban at the airport, and I was very surprised at the number of people there. I did not expect that in this area, and the idea, about the protests in the '60s and stuff like that, it's quite disheartening that we see like this. I feel like we see the same kind of movement. I mean, the Women's March and stuff like that. That was crazy. It was huge. I mean, there were people that I think like 100,000 people took part of it, even in London. But yet there's no action that comes out of it. Whereas, with like the Million Man March, it really did promote change. And it's like, is there no substance behind it? Is it that maybe the SJW thing makes it easier for people to write it off? Is there so much just are we too late? Like I often wonder.
I
think
guess that's the
Pakman,
big question: is are we too late?
No, I don't think you're too late because I actually felt the same way for a long time. Especially I remember thinking back to 2010 after shortly before the Tory government came back in power or coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and there had been something of a low turnout. And the Conservative Party had made it part of their platform, promised to cut certain grants to universities and raise tuition fees. And then there was a low turnout, even among young people. And then as soon as the Conservatives came back in power, about a week or two later, there were these massive marches in London, some of the biggest we'd ever seen. And I found myself asking, but we've just had an election, and you young people didn't turn out for that. You didn't turn out to vote in that. And now you're protesting a newly elected government. So for a long time, I thought it was just slacktivism. These people just wanted a day out, essentially, where they could just
it's
party
kind of
with
like
each other.
that though. Like whenever, say, like Obama or whatever would pass something conservative, like he didn't really get as much scrutiny from the left-leaning media or from like left-wing activists. It's kind of like something you always see.
Yeah, but this was even worse. I mean, they had a chance to vote, and they didn't turn out to vote. And then a week later, after the election, they turned out to protest. But then, if I may just finish, I'm going somewhere, so I promise I'm almost done. So, as I don't know how many of you know this, but we recently had an election in the UK. A snap election was called by.
Oh yeah, I followed all.
Yeah. Which will go down as one of the dumbest political moves in political history. And the turnout, the young people, I mean, Corbyn had been galvanizing them for years now. A lot of people thought it was just, another incident of, a bunch of hippies getting universities or getting university students getting excited. But they actually turned out this time around. They turned out and they voted.
Turned out
And he
pretty
did
big,
better. Yeah, and he did better than anyone projected it would. So I think it's just the ideas. It's not like that they're being lazy and they don't want to put into action what they protest. It's that the choices, they're not enthused by it. I'm sorry, but they're just not. They're not going to come out and vote for someone whose principles they don't believe in. Even if it means preventing, or even if it's the lesser of two evils, they're not going to turn out for it.
Well, one thing
but if
is,
they genuinely believe it, they will.
It's so hard to vote here. Like, I mean, in California, it wasn't as difficult. Like in Texas, it's insane. Like you have to. I think our system. We really need to fucking fix our registration system because it is difficult to vote. I mean, you technically. I mean, why can't we have same day registration? Voting should be a holiday. I mean, isn't in most countries, isn't it a holiday like for voting days?
It's not in the UK. I don't know if it is in most countries. I know it is in certain countries. I know it is in Australia.
Is it compulsory in Australia?
This is.
Yeah, it's mandatory.
Yeah, it's mandatory. If you don't vote, you get a little fine thing. I think with this we're kind of having a conversation which is leading to both, or I think how we vote, and perhaps, or not perhaps, but why it is that people are so disenfranchised with
disillusioned.
Yeah, that's the better word. Thank you. Disillusioned with the vote, and I think it's because the way our especially in America, we have a remarkably unrepresentative voting system. That is, we vote, and very few people are actually represented as a result of that vote, and so people end up being rather grumpy that they're like, "Oh, I'm voting, and it doesn't seem as though it's doing anything." because in reality, it's not necessarily. Or I mean, it's doing something, but the real impact is very, very minor. And I think that has a lot to do with how we vote, and in America especially, because we have first past the post, and that doesn't really help anybody. But gerrymandering doesn't help either. There's just a lot of people who are feeling disenfranchised, and I do mean disenfranchised there.
Do you see it getting any better?
I would love to see the results of Obama and Eric Holder's efforts to counter gerrymandering. I think that would be a good first step, but I honestly think that we need to start having a national discussion about
I mean,
about changing the way that we vote, and more so than just getting rid of the Electoral College. That's a red herring, if I may.